Now,
So if I
forward and hedge, these are just one of the things that you could be doing. Go ahead. What's your question?
well, if I click on the like on the currency that I wanna trade, right? Then you get, because I don't know how to do it, and I don't know what I'm gonna tell you is the right way to do it. So when you
Okay.
click on it, then you have market, limit, and stop option, right?
Okay. So yes, that's the way that you can buy the currency. So market is you're buying it at the market price. Limit is you say, I want to buy it up to this point or below that point. You set a limit. And the last one you said was?
Stop.
So we have spot, which means that you're buying it at the market right away, right? That's the market price. And then you also have a limit, right? A limit means that you're going to buy only up to $1 million worth of euros, or up to 1 million, whatever. You set a specific limit. And you have several other options. What you're seeing is that specific portal that you have is giving you these three specific options. But all of these sound to me that they are spot options. Are you going through Wanda? Is that what you're seeing?
Yes.
Okay, yes, those are what you're seeing there is the various types of spot market options. So not options, right? Options, in other words, alternatives, right? Yes, options is a different animal. We'll go through it in a second. So you don't just buy, you have one alternative to buy FX in the current market price, and that's your market option, right? That's one option, not option, one alternative, right? Yes, you could also buy, in other words, you can put some bells and whistles in your order of buying, again, though, in the spot market. In other words, the price is going to be determined in the spot market. You're not telling them necessarily that in some future date you'll be buying it at some predetermined price, but you're actually telling them, in other words, you're using the spot market in essence to do the inverse. What do you mean, Professor? I mean that you're putting, for instance, an open order in that says, if the dollar hits parity again, then yes, buy 1 million euros. Now, that's an open order, right? That's an open order. You have that order open with Rwanda, with your broker that you're using in Rwanda. That's different from a futures contract or an option, right? Now we use the word option correctly. Before we talk about alternatives, right? Or an option or a forward, which means that in these three cases, the mechanics are working pretty much the same. What you're doing is you're having some sort of a contract, some sort of an agreement by which you're buying an FX currency, specific amount, in a predetermined exchange rate and a predetermined date in the future. All right. So now this is a way, a tool that you can use to hedge against your FX exposure. All right. Now, if you're going to have an open order that we talked before, right? You were saying, well, I'm just placing an open order. Let's understand, in other words, the different role that they play. And then I think things are going to be more clear after we see that. So if you place an open order that you're going to buy euro whenever, how many euro? $5 million worth. Whenever, right? You're leaving it as an open order. Whenever the euro hits parity again, right? Yes, that's when, so you don't know the date, but you have an open order in the market, right? Are you hedging, I guess, against an FX risk? To some extent, yes. What's the caveat for that? Oh, that we always have to have, you know, $1 million worth of funds available because the price might hit, it's going to be executed. That transaction is going to be executed, right? But in terms of covering your FX risk, yes, it works the same way as a futures contract or a forward contract or an option would work. But these are now, on the other hand, what doesn't work is that the dollar may never hit parity to the euro, right? So therefore you have an open order. It just disappears. You know, you can have an open order, just have it on the books to the extent that you might have an open order for a week, a month, or whatever, or even just indeterminately. But if the market doesn't hit that price, that open order is never going to be executed. Whereas with your futures contract or with your option or with your forward contract, what you're doing is you're basically buying a contract. You are pretty much guaranteeing, you are guaranteeing that you're going to have an execution of this product, that you're actually going to, a month from now, buy, and whatever specific date you're buying, you are going to buy. You're going to be able to exercise that contract. Does that make sense?
Yes. I just don't know how to do it on the.
It's all right. We'll figure. I'll tell you a way. Nice and easy. With not necessary. You can spend 3 hours to learn Oanda. If you want to do that, that's fine. It's great. Oanda's you're not really learning the platform. You're learning what a specific broker because Oanda is a consortium of many brokers, banks, you name it, whatever, right? Yes. So that's what that platform is. And everyone has their own little subtlety. So if you're actually going to do FX as a professionally out there, right? Basically, you have to learn again, whichever brokerage you're using, your company is using, their differentiation. Oh, this is what this button means, and that's what that button. But here we want to learn the concept. So an easy way to learn this concept is simply to do a Google search and say, show me a 5-day or a 1-month euro dollar, let's say, future. Boom, it's gonna give you, right? It's gonna give you results. And those screen prints, which is basically bids, right? Or it's the Wall Street Journal that has an open rolling such a contract. So it's basically giving you what's the market price now for a 5-day or a 1 month or whatever so that's what you do. So that's for the purposes of a project, the screen print of that says that, oh, I'm buying 5 days from now or 1 month from now, this exchange rate at that specific price is fine. And yes, that quote, if we're doing it that way, because we're backing into it, we're saying what's on the market, that's not going to fit. This is important for your overall education. It's not going to fit your specific needs. Why? Because you want it 26 days from now. Now you want it, how many days? You know, how many weeks we have left? 4 or 5 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. So you want an X amount of days, right? So you want a little bit more tailored, right? That's basically products that your brokerage would give you. But what you're going to get from the Google search is fine, because it simply tells you it's fine, not because it will cover your specific FX coverage, right? But because it gives you a quote, and you say, based on this quote, this is what let's say 1 month FX euro to dollar will be. That's the quote that I'm getting. Does that make sense, or did I confuse you more?
No, I understand. Like, for example, I Googled the US against the Mexican peso, right?
Yes.
So I got in 1 week, the bid is gonna be 20.24, right?
Exactly.
Right. So
So in
just,
other words, you're buying now that contract or you're buying an option. You can say that you're buying an option to buy what you're seeing there as a screen print, and you can just assume, I'm just giving you a number now, that the options, the cost of the option might be 0.001% of the transaction. I'm just picking up a number. It's a little bit less than that, frankly. But so you do those assumptions. This is your cost of your option, right? To buy at the rate, at the forward rate that you get a quote. And the cost of getting into such a transaction would be 0.001% of the overall transaction. Therefore, you bought this, you have the coverage of, you show me first of all from your narrative, that's the important thing, that you know how to describe and how to articulate and put together and measure the FX risk. Oh, I have 2 million dollars worth of FX risk because, or 2 million Mexicans or 20 million Mexican pesos worth of FX risk because I have a payment a month from now that's worth 20 million pesos, or because I have retail operations down there that generate X amount of sales in Mexican pesos. That's how I get. So in other words, you have to come up with the narration, the story of who you are, right? And why would you have such an FX exposure, right? Then you say, and this is a quote that I get, and therefore this is how I hedge against it. Not extremely difficult. What we just discussed now, if you can put it with some numbers and with some understanding, and then substantiate it with, okay, this is how we measure the FX risk, and this is what the parity, what an FX contract, forward contract or futures contract or open order, because you could say, okay, yes, I have enough liquid, for instance. So I have stores down there, I have retail activity down, I have sales down there, and a general, in Mexico, I mean, in a general way, and I also have activity in the United States. So I don't really have an issue with my liquidity. Right? So therefore, I will always have $20 million around today. So therefore, at any given point, if I have just open orders, I can cover my FX risk. It's one way to cover it. If this is the situation that you have, but if that's not your situation, well, let's say you're in wholesale, you're not really in retail, so you're not going to have sales every single day. You will have to borrow, right? I don't want to make it a little more complicated. The borrowing means that you have to have an interest, blah, blah. Really, out there, yes, you can do it with open orders, but that means that you also have a potential to borrow. So that means you have to have some lines of credit and to tie it all together. I'm not asking to get it as complicated as I just described it. I want you to just get the basics. And the basics is, I understand what FX risk is. I can articulate it. I can measure it. I can show what sort of tools I have to basically hedge against such an FX risk.
Okay.
And yes, you could say, your options up to you and to your narrative. That shows me how much you've understood it or not. You can say, well, I have to hedge all of my FX risk. Why? Well, this is why. Or no, I'm only covering half of it. Why? Well, because I have overall liquidity, right? So the more liquid you are, and especially liquid in international markets, right? Then the more, in other words, pools of FX currencies you have all over the place, wherever you're doing business, in essence, you're having less of an overall FX risk because you have some Mexican peso, you have some euros, you have some dollars, you have some activity that generates these funds, right? Or you even have some credit lines in Mexico, or in terms of Mexico peso, or in terms of US dollar, and so on and so forth. So because you have all this, you can hedge, you can manage this FX risk, and that's FX risk management. That's what you would do in the corporate world. But what I want from this project is, number one, identify some some FX pairs. Number 2, give me a narrative. Number 3, tell me how you would handle your FX exposure, hedging, options, open orders. Not at all. I mean, it depends. You could, if you make it substantiated, not just you, everybody else, because I'm recording it and I'll post it, everybody else that's listening. If you decide to, if you can articulate and you have all these, that's fine. But no, what I would suggest is simple, what we said. In other words, find a price of a forward or a futures price, then assume that that a futures option to do an FX transaction is X, let's say 0.001, right? And therefore, this is the cost of buying it. So therefore, if you exercise it, yes, you're ahead of the game. In other words, you're gaining because you can exercise this FX option because your FX option is in the money. In other words, you bought the coverage and it's meaningful, or it's not in the money, and then the only cost that you had was that 0.001 of the transaction.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. No, yeah, I understand all that process.
Very
Just
good.
how do I do that in the on the platform? I can do that.
Okay.
Okay. Can
You
I?
can get the quotes, the spot market quotes, what you described in the very beginning,
Mhm.
spot market quotes. And yes, if you dig deeper, Wanda, especially by the business partners or whatever they call it. In other words, by those people, by those who have set up the Oanda as a platform, then they will give you quotes. But I've told you an easier way to take quotes, right? Because in real life, even if they gave you quotes, you're going to verify it. How are you going to verify it?
Mhm.
Even as simple as Google search, or with other platforms, right? And therefore, if one guy tells you this, the other guy tells you that, the other guy tells you that, well, then you know where the market is. So, end of parenthesis. Therefore, yes, a shortcut, if you may, by which you can, and which I suggest for you to do, because it's a big deal. It's more than 3 to 4 hours of actually learning a specific tool that is in Oanda for that specific business partner of Oanda, which was good only for that specific business partner. So even if you happen to have FX, because our course is learning, right, international economics and finance, the general picture. But even if you specialize and you become that technician that does that, you may not actually use it. Why? Because you're using another partner that has a different setup, right? So we're talking about time management here. So time management means that you get the screen print from, let's say, the Wall Street or whatever. You do a Google search and you can get, and why would you do a Google search? Because maybe you don't want euro dollar only, maybe you want a little bit more esoteric. You want, I don't know, PEC peso or you name it. So if you do a Google search, they're gonna give you some quotes, and that's how you would handle that. You had some other questions.
Well, no, I think I had one about the homework, but I think I got it done.
Okay.
About the tax, if the government like reduces the import tax. So I think I understood the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and the consumer surplus, which I think that was a question for chapter 8, right? Like if there was like cutting the tax was gonna bring, like,
so let's look at this. I think it's worth it. So we have the analysis is, the question is, should we what does economics have to say, international economics have to say in terms of tariffs? And we have this supply and demand. Here is our demand curve. Here is our supply curve for this specific country. right? Before it opens up in the rest of the world, right? This is, of course, this is from your textbook and from basic international economics. That's what we're going to see. So what is the consumer surplus now? Oh, it's the area below the demand curve and up until the price. What is the price? This is the price.
Mhm.
That corresponds also with this quantity. So this is Q E, right? And this is P E, right? The market clears and everything is okay. Yeah, and everything's okay, meaning in terms of what? Of allocative efficiency and production efficiency. In terms of this market, we're producing at the lowest possible price, so long as the market clears, right? And in terms of who is getting this allocative efficiency, we are also, why? Because whoever can afford it at this price actually gets it. So everybody that's on this demand curve up into the market price gets it. Good. But what are we saying here? We're saying that, oh, we also have a world price. So as soon as this economy opens up to international trade, the rest of the world, which is this, right? In other words, we have a PW. And we have a what? Another QW, which is what? It is the quantity, right? And the price that when we open up for the world price, which is this here, WP, W Paris, yes. So this world price, when we open up for the world price, our economy, that's where we are going to be selling at that price. And this is the quantity. In other words, the supply curve then looks like this. The supply curve will be, let's find a different diffuser, why not? The supply curve will be up to this point domestic, and after this point, it will be the world price, and it will sell as much as we can sell in that market. In other words, in the demand curve of that market. Do you understand it so far?
Yeah.
Good. So then we say that, well, we are going to have the producers of this area of the supply curve, right? Not like this measure. Why? Because they're losing the market. So these higher cost producers are not going to be selling in this market. They're going to become obsolete. What could the government do? Oh, it's going to impose a tariff, let's say this much tariff. Therefore, we have a new price for the market, which is this number here, which means we have this part of the supply curve still be domestically supplied. So the domestic supply increases a little bit, right? Increases a little bit, but also we have a reduction of the quantity that we used to order. We have, in other words, a triangle here. That is a deadweight loss. What is the consumer surplus in this situation? It is, again, this triangle up to this point. This triangle here, that is beyond, that is the amount that we're no longer consuming in this country, is a deadweight loss. This rectangle or whatever, yes, this area here is the tariff, price times quantity, right? And this triangle here is a gain of the local domestic producers who regain this quantity. And yes, if you see what's the consumer surplus in this case, the consumer surplus is up to this point, right? So this trapezoid here is part of the addition of the benefit that the suppliers get. So the supplier surplus. So the consumer surplus is reduced by this, but the supplier surplus is increased, and we have certain triangles here that are deadweight losses. So this is the basic diagram. Do you understand the basic diagram with tariffs? Yes or no?
Okay, I think I did. So one step.
First of all, we start with supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
And a price. Then we have a world price.
Mm-hmm.
Then from the world price, that means that we produce up until the world price, and then everything else up until a demand curve will be provided by importers because we're importing at that world price. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then we say, well, no, we're going to, in order to avoid this destruction of, or at least bring back some of this production, we're going to put a tariff in. How much? This much. So in other words, we're increasing the price by this much. What's going to happen? Well, this is the new price. This parallelogram, right, is the tariff, the price times the quantity. So this quantity is the amount of imports that got reduced by this amount from what it was before, right? Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And therefore, how much is the new consumer surplus? The new consumer surplus is up to here. The consumer surplus is always below the demand curve and up until the prevailing market price.
Right.
So, good. Yes, but this is simply a model, simply an overall diagram. What do you mean, Professor? First of all, in other words, let's understand this a little bit better, and let's understand its applications. That's perhaps interesting. First of all, yes, the world price may in fact be lower, right? Yes. This supply and demand is a short run diagram. It tells me what happens with the supply and demand in a very given limited period of time, where supply looks like this and demand looks like this. Things could change. So in other words, it doesn't give me the longer run picture, this diagram. Is that important? Yes, it is important. Why? Because through this increasing or decreasing of the price, of the world price, we could actually have the destruction of an industry. We have a world price that's way down here, right? So in other words, we have zero local production, right? What could happen? Oh, that's the phenomenon of dumping. I think that's in chapter.
The next topic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in other words, you're producing and you are exporting at a price that's basically shutting down that other country's industry. And in the long run, you're the only one producing the widget. And if that happens, well, then maybe you'll start increasing the price, number one. Number two, this is a comparison, supply and demand are always a comparison between price and quantity. Quality, differentiation of a product, the various grades, who's useful, how utility and all that is assumed to be absorbed in the price in a classical economic analysis. Well, that may or may not be the case out there, right? For instance, cars, are they all the same quality? So in other words, if I simply increase the price or decrease the price, does that have any reflection in what I'm actually getting? Yes, of course, it's going to have a reflection.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, there's a historical example of this and of quotas. I'll give you a combination. So as you may have read, yes, this is for tariffs, but what happens if we simply allow we don't put a value, right, ad valorem tax, but we simply say we have a quota. You can only import X amount of cars. Let's say 1 million cars. Whatever you're importing now, or whatever number we want, that's what you're importing. That happened in the 1980s in the United States. And as a result, what happened? Well, did the government get this tariff? No, there wasn't any tariff. There was a quota. In other words, that was the right of the existing importers in the United States to import, Japanese importers to import X amount of cars in the United States, the same as they had. That's what the law that was passed back then. Anyway, yes. So what happened as a result of that? Well, the Japanese started producing more expensive cars, more high quality cars. What happened as a result of that? The US manufacturers lost that very lucrative segment, which is the luxury cars, or the luxury and above, right? Or middle and above. So whereas up until the mid-1980s, the Japanese cars were basically the lower side of the market. In other words, lower price, also lower markup margin, right? If you're going to make a car, if you're going to produce a car, right, 89% of that cost exists, whether you're producing a very cheap car or whether you're producing a more expensive car. Right? You understand that? So in other words, what happened was then that basically the United States lost, or the US manufacturing lost car manufacturing because they imposed a quota system. And this area here, that's the tariff equivalent of the quota, right? This area here. In some countries in the last century, right, in the 80s, 90s, so in some countries, this accounted for a whopping 30, 40, 50, 60 in some cases of their GDP, right? The gross domestic product. So in other words, if you added all of this tariff equivalent of the quota, in other words, you can imagine how much those import licensing in certain, like Indonesia, or whatever, right? Yes, how much they would cost? Very much, very expensive. Why? Because exactly it was basically a high tariff or a very restrictive international trade protectionism. This has lowered. As this sort of tariffs in the last 30 years has basically fallen significantly. And that's what we call globalization. Nowadays, however, we have more of a regionalization, which is what you're reading this week, I think, with the European Union and whatnot. So yes, coming back to our diagram, this is a basic diagram. Yes, this can have a good basis for an analysis of many concepts and ideas, but on the other hand, it has its limitations. Short term, not long term. So we have to talk about short and long term. It's also only price and not necessarily quality. It also talks about a specific product, not its substitutes, not its complementary products, not its overall structure of the market. Things could be a lot more complicated, in other words. Let's take let's assume that this is your cell phone, right? That's the product that we're talking about. Yes, but the cell phone has components from, dozens and dozens of countries. So then we have to look at other concepts such as value adding, right? What's the impact? Things like that. Did I confuse you enough, Marie? Did I confuse you enough?
At the end, I got good until like the GDP, like what the government gets from imposing a tariff, a quota.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, this is basically, so in other words, it's a good basic diagram, but it is a basic diagram. Reality is a lot more complicated. So when you're looking at international economics, when you're, let's say, a policymaker advisor, or you're the policymaker, and you say, well, should we put a quota or not? Yes, you would start from this analysis, but then you would also say, well, what is this product? What sort of value added does it have? What's the impact on the overall economy? What sort of multiplier effect does it have? How many jobs do they rely on this or not? Right? Yes. So in other words, yes, we may have this, let's say this increase in the consumer surplus because of international trade, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this will actually happen, right? In other words, we don't necessarily know how exactly a demand curve is or how exactly a supply curve is. We guess a lot of this. We guess, this is econometrics, but yes, we're guessing that yes, the demand curve for cars will actually be like this, or the demand curve for iPhones will actually look like this or not. So things could be a lot more complicated. A lot of this is in a case-by-case basis. A lot of this also it has to do with what's the overall impact in our economy, which is, yes, we may start from this diagram, but it's a lot more than simply a consumer surplus. So what we see as consumer surplus is a lot of a more complicated thing. And again, short-term and long-term. Okay, so these folks here aren't going to be producing because we allowed tariffs, but aren't going to produce. What's going to happen with them? What's going to happen with those resources? Do we have a robust enough economy so that it will reabsorb those resources? Or are we going to have the development of a Rust Belt? And if we're going to have a Rust Belt, then, well, that means that we're going to have a situation that's going to be a lot more impactful for that economy that opens up its prices. On the other hand, yes, if we have protectionism, what happens then? Well, then you're basically creating a less than, competitive industry situation. So you're keeping the exports. Okay, at some point when exports actually show up, or when the product develops, you had cell phone, then you went to smartphone or whatnot. It's whenever, in other words, you move to a product that's significantly higher with a lot more technology or whatnot, you will become then obsolete. Nokia, the Finnish cell phone, for instance, that's exactly what happened. So these are a lot more dynamic. So it's when we're looking at international economics, yes, you have the model, yes, you have the basic, but you also have the dynamicism of what the markets are doing in that specific industry, in that specific country. And that's it.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, I think after like reading the whole weekend, I got it.
Good. No, it's basic stuff. I'm happy that you did. You're doing very well. Keep up the good work.
I try. Okay, well, if I have more questions about these coming chapters, I
send
you an email. Okay, perfect.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Yes, no problem. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.